Just, Oh. Ready?
Yes, sir. Cue video of Beefy. And yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Around the 412 Fantasy Football Show, proudly presented by Crowworthy, where winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. You can follow at Crowworthy on Twitter. Visit us at thecrowworthy.com and go to the Pittsburgh City page where you'll find podcasts such as this one, blogs, fantasy advice, gambling advice, all that good stuff and more. I'm Smitty. With me, as always, is my co-host, Donnie Druin. Donnie, what is going on?
Yeah, not too much, man. My Lakers delivered since we last spoke last week. So shout out to Braun bringing home that 4th championship. Also, let me give a shout out to our Pittsburgh Pirates #1 overall pick.
Oh, okay. Makes sense. I was just saying
Brian
that.
Hayes,
I guess
come on home. That's future New York Yankee, Brian Hayes.
Why'd you have to say that? But anyways, the Lakers did not deliver the day that you were wearing the jersey on here, though.
Yeah, shout out to Danny Green.
Yeah, he just wanted to extend the series a little bit, give Jimmy Butler and some Heat fans a little bit of false hope. That's all.
Yeah, he wanted to win the title 24 days before, 24 years following Kobe Bryant winning his first title in LA. So,
very cool. Very cool stuff. Not a huge Laker guy, but I am a LeBron guy, so it was cool to see. Why are we talking about basketball in here? When did that become a thing?
I don't know, man. Just basketball fever. But now that that's out of the way, I guess we can, focus solely on football now that our Pirates aren't in the playoffs.
True. Okay, so if you're tuning in, if you're watching, thank you for stopping by. Be sure to subscribe. Hit a like, comment with us if you want. We've had a lot of interaction the past couple of weeks, which we've been really enjoying. I do have the Titans and Bills game up. I am wearing a Kevin Byard shirt. I expect to hear from some people in the comments about that, especially considering the Steelers had to use a bye week already because of the Titans. So I'm expecting some Steeler fans to give me some flack for this. So I would be disappointed if you do not. If you are listening back, please head to the YouTube page so you can get involved. When we do go live every Tuesday, that's youtube.com/c/around the412. That will take you right to the page. Subscribe, hit the notification bell. That will notify you when we go live. Again, you can come in here and chat with us while we do the show live, all that good stuff. So I got to tell you guys, as I do every week, about Manscaped. Now, I will say, you guys got to bear with me on this one. We got a new ad read for football season, which I'm excited about once I get really into the groove of things. But this will be my first time reading this. So I got the paper right here. Let's do this. So, folks, football is back, and that means it's time to throw in your team's colors and make sure you don't fumble your grooming below the waist. Our partners at Manscaped are here to save your boys from a TJ Watt hit, so you stay clean and take care of yourself where it matters most. Manscaped is here with a surefire touchdown with the best tools for your grooming experience. That's why Manscaped has redesigned the electric trimmer. The Manscaped engineered team spent 18 months to perfect the greatest ball hair trimmer ever and just released a new and improved Lawnmower 3.0. It's simply the best hygiene tool for the modern man. The ceramic blade and skin-safe technology, your snags will be reduced. The Perfect Package 3.0 is out. It comes with a new lawnmower, waterproof cordless body trimmer, performance boxer briefs, and a travel bag for when you're done quarantining. The Perfect Package 3.0 also comes with a crop preserver and crop reviver. You might be asking yourself, what are those? I call them the deodorant and the toner, so I never refer to them by their actual name, but that's what those are. So obviously the crop preserver is an anti-chafing ball deodorant. It ensures that your afternoon stroll doesn't end with your balls sticking to your leg. The Crop Reviver is a spray-on toner for your balls. It's made with soothing aloe and witch hazel extracts that will give your balls a boost. So, unlike Ian Rappaport, I'm allowed to talk about this on here. So I'm a huge fan of Manscaped. Donnie, did I ever tell you about the bad experience I had with Manscaped?
I don't ever recall you ever having a bad
That's because
experience.
I didn't have one. There's nothing
Ian
to talk
Rappaport
about.
could not have said it better himself.
There's been nothing negative to say. There's been nothing bad to talk about. No, I love the stuff. I truthfully do. I'm not just saying that. I've been a huge fan since I started using it. The body wash is awesome. I have all the products. They're all awesome. So again, if you guys go to manscaped.com, you can get whatever you want, put it in a cart at checkout, enter the code 412. That should get you 20% off plus free shipping. So again, code 412, 20% off plus free shipping at manscaped.com. All right. So, I already see that the chat's rolling before we even get really talking about football. I'll just keep talking about Manscaped. So Anthony here has another trade offer. So a little bit of background info. I have Hopkins, Diggs, Cooper Kupp, and Anderson. I assume that's Robbie Anderson. Should I trade Diggs and Robinson for CEH? My running backs are currently Kamara, Eckler, and Robinson, by the way.
Man, losing Eckler hurts a lot. So I do understand wanting to add more running back depth. I would see if you wanted to run 3 running backs in the flex spot, then I would definitely roll with that. Smitty, I'm actually behind on my feed, so your look on your face isn't enticing.
Yeah, Josh Allen just threw a pick, but I mean, it wasn't his fault. It went off. One of his receivers just tipped up into the air. Yeah, one off Andre Roberts, and Malcolm Butler was just sitting right under it. But yeah, I mean, see, the thing is for me with this, James Robinson has been playing very well. Now, we kind of talked about this last week because it's the same situation. If you don't buy into that continuing to be the case, I can understand wanting to trade him. At the same time, with what Clyde Edwards-Helaire is doing, it almost be like I would be trying to buy low on him if I could, because he's not really producing to the way that we thought he would in Kansas City to this point. So, and this is, again, he's in a non-PPR lead. He mentioned that last week. He just threw that in here again. So I'm of the mindset that in a non-PPR lead, I think James Robinson has close to the same, if not as much value as Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And I mean, I don't know that you'll agree with me on that, but if it was a PPR lead, I might be willing to make that deal and just, take the bet on CH bouncing back and getting back to where we thought he would be. But in a non-PPR league, James Robinson, as I mentioned on here last week, I view him truthfully as an RB2. So you'd be giving up an RB2 and a guy that currently, coming into this week at least, leads the lead in receiving yards for a guy that to this point hasn't shown to be, an RB1 like we thought he would be, a bona fide top 5 play week in and week out in CEH. So for me, right now, this is a no.
Yeah, it's got to be a no for me as well. Had CEH produced on a week-to-week basis like we thought he would be, just in terms of the numbers, I would definitely think about pulling the trigger. But Edwards-Helaire, got to put the emphasis on the E. Edwards-Helaire has been not disappointing, but hasn't exactly lived up to the hype following a very strong week 1 performance. I just think you got to stick with your guns. You got a very good receiving core. I wouldn't gamble away Robinson quite yet, and if you were, I'd probably try to find the running back just a little bit higher in terms of production than CEH right now.
Yeah, I agree. And real quick too, we have another question here. Tyler wants to know, is this the week that he finally benches Matt Ryan? Don't necessarily have to play Daniel Jones either, but Ryan has been bad, and I can even put a receiver in that spot because he is like the 2 flex or whatever, super flex. I mean, Man, Matt Ryan is really surprising to me just because, I mean, granted, I'd never, viewed him the way a lot of people viewed him, but he was always going to throw for a ton of yards, get down in the garbage time. He's going to throw for 300 yards a game. He's going to finish the season somewhere between 4,500, 4,800, maybe up to 5,000 yards, especially with the weapons around him, and especially like Calvin Ridley taking the leap he has. It's just surprising to me that Matt Ryan is where he is. The arm just looks like it's completely gone. And what a drastic drop off from even just last year. But when your other option is Daniel Jones, I'm not ready to make the switch for him. I would just continue to bank on what I think still might be there, mainly just due to the weapons too. I mean, I hope Julio's back sooner rather than later. I think that's a big part of it. And obviously, there's just too many weapons there. Like Matt Ryan doesn't need to be great. He just needs to be an average guy. And again, maybe all it took was a change of coach. We saw what the Texans came out and did after firing Bill O'Brien. Maybe we could see a similar thing with the Atlanta Falcons where they just weren't motivated, and maybe we see a different Matt Ryan going forward.
Yeah, we'll see. I completely agree with you. I just think when comparing Ryan to a guy like Daniel Jones, the upside needs to be there for Daniel Jones, and it just simply isn't. That offense isn't clicking like many thought it would after Saquon Barkley, got hurt and eventually was deemed out for the rest of the season. Week to week, Matt Ryan at least gives you that potential upside, like you said, with the weapons around him. And it just hasn't happened yet. Nobody knows why. There's an explanation for it. But we've seen Matt Ryan sling the ball to Julio Jones, to everybody else on the offense. He's one of the league's MVPs just a few years ago. So it's not like he's an improving guy. We know he can do it. For whatever reason, he's just not producing in 2020. But if it really comes down to Ryan and Daniel Jones, it's Matt Ryan for me. No questions asked. Daniel Jones just doesn't excite me as a fantasy owner, and he just doesn't produce to quarterback one levels when you're trying to win games on a week to week basis.
Yeah, it's been kind of disappointing. I expected him to take a little bit of a leap. And granted, Saquon going out certainly hasn't helped. That line has been pretty bad. Since week one, Andrew Thomas has not been good. I don't know what's going on there. But, there's not much for Daniel Jones to work with, and he himself has not been good. So it's just a bad situation all around. He hasn't taken that leap that many people expected, because there were some flashes last year. Although it didn't look great, I think that you'd be lying to yourself if you said you didn't think that, okay, this guy looked like maybe he could be the guy for New York, but they haven't surrounded him at least to this point, and he has not played well. We got another question here. Would you trade Josh Jacobs for Devontae Adams straight up? I have Elliott, Gurley, and Connor. It's non-PPR. I'd also want to know who your receivers are, for one.
Yeah, and it being non-PPR kind of.
Yeah, non-PPR, it's tough to trade a running back for a receiver 1-for-1.
Yeah.
Like I'd almost want to do, running back and receiver for running back and receiver. Maybe somebody's getting a slight advantage at running back. The other gets a slight advantage at receiver. But
Connor and Gurley are like pretty much PPR backs as well, just in terms of like what they do and like the extra stuff they add in the passing game.
Obviously, we're going to see Elliott did a huge boost here with the unfortunate injury to Dak. So that's obviously he's a great player to have. And Josh Jacobs, I think that I don't do that trade, honestly, being that it's 1-for-1, because I would much rather stick with Elliott and Jacobs as your 1 and 2, and either using Gurley or Connor as your flex, and then just roll with it with you have at receiver, being that's non-PPR. If this is a PPR league, I probably would. And that honestly, like it swings that trade that much for me, the fact that it's non-PPR.
Yeah, I completely agree.
His other receivers are Lockett, Ridley, Chark, and you have Ridley and Julio Jones. That's interesting. You have Ridley, Julio Jones, and Todd Gurley. Are you an Atlanta Falcons fan? If so, I'm sorry. If not, I mean that's just wild. But those receivers in a non-PPR league compared to Devontae Adams, I think that there's not that much of a drop off, and I'd probably just stick with Josh Jacobs as opposed to making that deal. Okay, so we gotta move on. You guys can still keep putting in your questions, but we want to start talking about the topics we have on here. We were talking back and forth with each other before we started the show about one of the topics I put on here. Le'Veon Bell looks like he's going to be traded from the New York Jets. And where could he realistically go that gives him any type of fantasy value this season? Because it looks like the trade is definitely going to happen, regardless of what the Jets get back. I don't think it needs to be much. I also think that they're probably going to have to eat a good portion of that contract to facilitate a deal. And he might have to take a pay cut as well next year in order to make something work. It's such a bad situation for all parties involved in this thing. Adam Gase comes in and it obviously was the wrong hire immediately. I mean, I think everybody knew that. But, just the lies that he's said too. I mean, the plan with Le'Veon coming back, He even said, we want to get him more involved in the passing game, especially because, Joe Flacco was stepping in for Sam Darnold. We want to rely heavily on Le'Veon. Le'Veon gets one target in the passing game. I mean, I don't think Le'Veon's the same player we saw in Pittsburgh. I don't think that that's the type of player he can be anymore. However, not even giving him the ability to do anything out of the backfield catching the ball, I mean, that's just completely throwing away his skill set, and there's no purpose for him to be on your football team. So with that, I know that we talked a little bit about it before. Is there anywhere that you think that he could get traded to that he would, provide some fantasy value for a team? Because a lot of people were taking him probably as their RB2, or at least hoping that he'd give them some flex appeal. So, I mean, where could he go that gives owners any type of hope?
I was scrolling through the list of teams, and I'm just not sure. We're 5 weeks into the season. A majority of the teams already addressed running back position in the draft, and another majority of the teams won't be willing to give up draft capital for a running back who clearly isn't the same as he was the day he signed that huge contract in New York. So I have two teams listed down here. One of them I think could legit happen, and the other I'm just not sure if it would. So the Washington football team is probably the team that I think would be like a best fit / best case scenario. They can't run the ball at all. They're averaging just 81 yards on the ground per game. That the bottom of the barrel in terms of the league. They definitely need some kind of superstar appeal at the running back position. Granted, I know there's like 5 different running backs people believe can get the job done in Washington right now. But adding a guy like Le'Veon Bell to the backfield would definitely help. I've seen Jacksonville thrown around as a potential landing spot for him as well. They just got rid of Leonard Fournette. I don't think they'd be willing to, wave goodbye to one, running back who wants to get paid for another who did get paid and would have to take on that huge significant contract. Plus, James Robinson's balling out. I just don't know. I don't think there's a ton of upside for Le'Veon wherever he would go.
Yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily disagree with that. I'm curious to see if anybody in the comments can throw somebody out there. Going through and looking at the teams, I'm also looking at the standings as well and just where teams are. Because, okay, so we could say like a team like the New York Giants, right? If they were in a place to compete but had lost Saquon, say they were at, say they had even one win at this point in that division. Say they had 1 or 2 wins, and Le'Veon was a rental. Maybe it makes sense to give up pretty much nothing, just say like a 6th or 7th round pick, like the Jets are probably going to get back for Le'Veon because you feel like you're going to compete, and then he'd be gone and you don't have to pay him or anything like that. He's just there for this year to compete, hopefully get in the playoffs, blah, 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 whatever. However, that situation doesn't make sense just because he's still under contract next year. They still have Saquon Barkley on that roster, and they're not in a position to compete for the playoffs. I understand the structure, the way that division looks right now. Obviously, we already talked about that going down. But the Giants aren't going to compete in that division, and a trade there just doesn't make sense. Another team that comes to mind also in the NFC would be like the Arizona Cardinals. I brought them up just because Kenyon Drake has not given them what they had hoped, paying him $8 million on the transition tag that they put on him. And Chase Edmonds, I actually really like Chase Edmonds. He was productive last year when they let him get some touches. He's been productive this year. A lot of people think that eventually they're going to get tired of Kenyon Drake and make the move where Chase Edmonds is their number one. However, I think that they'd be much better suited letting Chase Edmonds stay in the role that he's kind of in right now. And maybe that's a good spot for Le'Veon to go to. Again, if you're letting Chase Edmonds stay in that role, are you really utilizing Le'Veon to the best of his ability? Because, he's primarily for the most of his career been a 3-down guy, and 3rd down catching the ball in the backfield. That's what made him so valuable. That's what made him one of the best, if not the best, running backs in the league during his time in Pittsburgh. So that again, does it make much sense? No, but what team really does then? If you're breaking it down like this, the Chargers, obviously they lost Austin Eckler. They got Justin Jackson and Josh Kelly there, who have been fine. Maybe one of those guys will come up a little later on the waiver wire. So, but having no Austin Eckler there for a couple weeks. But they're in a position too. They're in last place in their division as well, similarly to the Giants. Like, are they going to compete this year? Does it make sense to bring him on? And again, it's not just a rental. He's there past this year. Of course, you could, buy him out or whatever. You have the financial ramifications for doing that. And the last team that I wanted to bring up would be the Dolphins, who actually do have a couple wins with that 7th playoff spot. And maybe they could, try to make some noise and go for that extra playoff spot. But, their running back situation hasn't been all that bad. I mean, they traded that pick for Matt Breida already, a 5th rounder. Are they really going to do more capital to get another running back? Jordan Howard's there, who's just kind of like the goal line guy, short yardage guy. But really, like, the guy has been Myles Gaskin, who has been actually pretty productive for them. I talked about him a couple weeks ago, and he's given, RB2/flex value to teams. So I don't see a natural fit for him for whatever reason, whether it be where the team's at standings wise, or, just the teams that can't take on that salary or would want to, and potentially give up a pick as well. I mean, it's just, I don't see a natural spot for Le'Veon to go and produce. I mean, somebody's going to take him on.
Yeah.
But I don't, like, nothing comes to mind immediately, like jumps off the page is like, this is a great landing spot for him.
No, definitely. And like I touched on earlier, we're already 5 weeks into the season. Had this been prior to the season, I think there might be a lot more buzz and a lot more acceptance to where he might potentially go. Now, as an NFL GM, as owner, head coach, whatever, I would not be inclined to bring on Le'Veon Bell for not even a full season. I'd have to pay a tremendous price tag while also giving up capital to go get him when I could just draft a running back for a quarter of the price, who would be much younger, a lot less tread on the tires, et cetera. It's just not a good situation for Le'Veon. It's not a good situation for the Jets. I know he probably will get dealt at some point. I just, like, at least with my fantasy football blinders on, there's not like a perfect landing spot for Le'Veon, and that's just the truth.
He's due $6 million the rest of the year. So you'd have to think Jets got to eat some salary, plus be willing to take like a day 3 pick. I mean, and are they going to be willing to do that, just to get rid of this guy?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, we'll see. The situation has gotten to that point, though, where you assume like a trade has to happen. I mean, the dude's liking tweets about how bad his head coach is. So
and his head coach is firing back, and
yeah,
Le'Veon was just talk to him, man. Yeah, it's it is. I think if it was Mike Tomlin and Steelers, it might be a different narrative, because Mike Tomlin has no control over the locker room.
Yeah,
funny.
True. Okay, well, I think the people are ready to hear you talk about some tight ends.
Oh man, I wasn't even ready to talk about tight ends myself whenever making this list, just scrolling through. With injuries, bye weeks, postponements, all of the good stuff. Very interesting week for tight ends in fantasy football. Travis Kelce finished as tight end 1 last week with about 25 points, and obviously I'll touch on him in a little bit. So tight end 5 going into this week for me is going to be Robert Tonyan versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Coming off a bye week with the Green Bay Packers, had a phenomenal primetime showing, exploded for 33.8 points in PPR formats. He's hit double-digit points in 3 straight games, and, you really got to like the Packers coming off a bye with extra time to prepare. I think he might be a big focal point of that, game plan moving forward, even with the arrival of Devontae Adams.
Yeah, what's weird, just real quick to touch on that, is his projected points it was like lower than 5. Like, I was like going through the tight ends looking, at least on Yahoo. I don't know where he was at on ESPN, but he wasn't even like on the first page. I'm like, this guy just put up like 30.
Yeah.
Like, I understand that, it could just be an anomaly game, but that's not, that hasn't really, that's obviously a little bit of an outlier, but as you mentioned, like, he's produced in multiple weeks. So.
No, definitely. And like, had he not scored 2 double-digit point games before that, I would definitely understand that. But I think they're expecting big things out of Devontae Adams, and probably big things out of Aaron Jones coming off the bye weeks. We'll see. Number 4 is actually a guy who's playing right in front of our eyes. As we're talking Jonnu Smith versus the Houston Texans. He's yet to touch football. About 7.5 minutes into this game, but he's currently tight end number 3 in fantasy football, averaging 16.4 points per game in PPR formats. Texans are a middle of the road defense whenever it comes to allowing, tight end fantasy points per game. And yeah, I just think, Jonnu Smith, barring a AJ Brown breakout game where, Brown's already caught a touchdown this week. But I think he's still the go-to guy if and when the Titans do end up running the ball.
Okay, I don't have too much to say about that. I mean, Jonnu Smith, I've talked about before. I'm higher on than most. I think he's one of the best athletes at the position, and in a position where you mentioned, bye weeks really starting to kick in now. We don't know it's going to be some dart throws in there. I think that the upside, what he brings to the table, very well warrants top 5 play in a lot of weeks.
Definitely, yeah, and I just feel like for the entire tight end position, it's a lot of just copy and paste week to week because there's not a whole lot of disparity, with the top guys in the rest of the league. So, number 3 is going to be Mark Andrews versus the Philadelphia Eagles. Eagles are allowing the 4th most fantasy points to tight ends per game. Mark Andrews coming off a pretty solid outing and a 27-3 victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. He continues to be the tight end that we thought he was going to be prior to the season starting. He's right behind Kelsey and Kittle, and his production so far has warranted that. So he comes in as tight end 3 for me. And then obviously the top 2 tight ends every week, no doubt about it. Travis Kelsey, George Kittle. I do have Kelsey number 1. He faces Buffalo this week. Tight end 1 last week, like we talked about, 25 points. Just not a whole lot of stuff to argue against him whenever it comes to Kelsey. And then obviously George Kittle playing next week. I think the 49ers offense will rebound after a horrific showing, a surprisingly horrific showing against the Miami Dolphins, where they just got their ass beat for 60 minutes. But yeah, it's my top 5 tight end list. Robert Tonyan is the kind of outlier in an otherwise standard list week to week.
Yeah, I gotta give myself a pat on the back for picking Dolphins money line there on the show.
Ooh.
Yeah. I'm not a believer in the San Fran team. 1, I'm not a believer in Garoppolo. 2, there's just too many injuries. If they were at full strength on defense, I think that their defense would definitely will them to some wins. I think they'd be a playoff team with a healthy defense. But I don't think that they make the playoffs this year.
What were they money line?
The Dolphins were plus 360.
Shit.
Yeah.
Man, props.
Yeah, no, it was a good bet. That was obviously my biggest win of the week, calling that one. But hard to argue up at the top there. I mean, again, those 2 guys are going to be interchangeable, but with what we've seen from Jimmy Garoppolo just got benched for CJ Beathard in that showing against Miami, which granted you do expect him to bounce back, and regardless of what they get at quarterback play, like George Kittle's going to be in the top 5 most weeks regardless. So he had 4 for 44, even though the offense did nothing. That's not terrible. Most tight ends do that. You're like, okay, like I'll take that. But yeah, I definitely expect them to bounce back a little bit. I'll talk about my receivers first. I'll save the running backs for after that. My receivers, I told you I was going to have one surprise in here for you, an unexpected name. But this guy is 2nd in fantasy points per game at the position, and it's Jamison Crowder of the New York Jets. He's averaging over 20 fantasy points per game. He's played 3 of the 5 possible games. So obviously, some take that with a grain of salt. However, it doesn't matter who's playing quarterback for these guys. Obviously, the Jets, whether it be Sam Darnold or Joe Flacco, they haven't gotten much from the quarterback position this year. But this guy just still produces. I mean, he catches 10 plus passes a game. Last week he went for 116. If he scores a touchdown, it's a bonus, but especially in PPR leagues, if this guy, he lines up mainly in the slot, if this guy is getting targeted 15 plus times a game, which he has been, I mean, he's a pretty safe bet to be definitely inside like the top 10. And again, he's averaging over 20 fantasy points. So I'm putting him at number 5 this week playing against Miami.
Yeah, I actually saw a tweet about Jameson Crowder today, so it's funny that he's your surprise guy heading into the top 5. He just produces, man. I mean, there's no other way around it. He's not Julio Jones, he's not Devontae Adams, but at the end of the day, he's going to get your fantasy team points. I believe that's the first time he's cracked either of our top 5s this year. So if trends continue, then this won't be his first or last time.
I would, I'd imagine that he could pop back up in here should he continue to produce the same way. My wide receiver 4 here, going to be Calvin Ridley, who bounced back after having that 0. Again, I'm a big believer in what teams do after firing their head coach. So, Atlanta, Minnesota here. I don't know if I'm going to pick Atlanta to win that. I haven't decided yet. We'll talk about that more in our betting show. But Calvin Ridley against Minnesota here, who we have not seen very good things from that secondary. I think that Calvin Ridley's in for a big game here. Hopefully Matt Ryan looks, better than he has. Hopefully he can play at least average. Calvin Ridley's an absolute beast. You don't need to be very good to get him the ball. Just give him the ball and let him do the rest. He's my wide receiver 4 this week, mainly due to the matchup.
Yeah, and it definitely helps when you have Julio Jones kind of
hopefully he plays.
Boy. Yeah. So Julio Jones playing definitely does help Ridley a whole lot, but I think at this point Ridley's developing into his own solidified receiver. Aside from the fact that they do have, for my money, the best receiver in football across the line of scrimmage. But yeah, I mean, Ridley, both in real life and fantasy, he's gotten the job done. Like you said, he bounced back. Tremendous. Well, you're picking him to bounce back tremendously. There's not enough good things to say. Like you said, they did fire their head coach. They're probably going to, want to come out with a little bit of fire underneath the rest. And, Matt Ryan's got a lot of people to prove wrong too. So it's not like Ridley's the only one having a couple of doubts around him. But I really like him in the top 5 this week.
Moving along, my wide receiver 3 here. Hopefully he's back. I mentioned there was one guy that has more fantasy points per game than Jamison Crowder. That's Davante Adams. Hopefully he returns from this hamstring injury. I assume that he will. Had that bye week, the extra week to come back. He said he could have played the prior week. So I think he comes back here against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay, not a bad secondary by any means. I mean, Carlton Davis is a very good corner when he's not, taking defensive pass interference penalties and getting too handsy. But we'll see how they match up with him. Either way, when you talk about, a guy that's just going to be a target monster, the target share is way too good. Aaron Rodgers is playing lights out, one of the top MVP candidates this year. So Davante Adams coming back into the lineup, I think he has a big day. He could catch 10+ balls like he does every single week, and I don't mind the matchup here. Again, not great, probably more middle of the pack, but it's Davante Adams.
Yeah, especially when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball, who I'll talk about in a little bit. Davante Adams is going to be a top 5 play almost every week, especially in PPR formats. Talking's hard today.
My wide receiver 2 coming off a 2-touchdown performance on Sunday Night Football. You threw him in the top 5 last week. I hadn't put him in the top 5 before that. Adam Thielen going against Atlanta. I already mentioned I have Calvin Ridley going against Minnesota as my 4. Same game. I did Adam Thielen going against Atlanta. Atlanta, terrible defense. This is a game where, they could get a lot of work done on the running in the running game. Dalvin Cook, though, a little bit banged up with a groin injury. We'll see if he plays. If not, a guy that I might talk about a little bit later will step in. I think he'll be able to still play pretty well. But should Dalvin Cook sit out, we're going to see a little bit more, I think, in the passing game than the way Minnesota normally operates. Adam Thielen going to be the big beneficiary there against a terrible secondary, much like the Seattle one that he just played. I think he's in for another big game.
Yeah, and a lot of people were expecting Justin Jefferson, the other Vikings receiver, to come out and have himself a nice game, try to put and string together 2 in a row. That didn't happen at all. Justin Jefferson kind of disappeared under the lights. Adam Thielen, however, continues to show up week after week, and he's proving that, he wasn't a product of Stephon Diggs drawing a whole lot of attention on the other side. He's not a product of, just Kirk Cousins getting the bag. And Adam Thielen legitimately is one of the better receivers in the NFL, and he just continues to produce week after week.
Yeah, I saw Stubbs said that Todd Gurley better be in my top 5 running backs. Honestly, I mean, we actually were pretty high on him coming into the season than most people. Obviously LA kind of just, throwing him away. And Atlanta picks him up. And we thought, as long as they can keep his touches managed, when they do give him the ball, he's going to be very productive with them. Well, I mean, you look at what he's put together here. 12.5, week 2, he only had 6, but then 14.5, 18, 23 last week. Now, granted, last week was the only 100-yard game he had, so he has been a little touchdown dependent, but because he has 5 rushing touchdowns. But he still, is catching the ball a little bit too. He had 4 receptions in last week in that game for close to 30 yards. So, I mean, he is a guy that kind of warrants that. I will say, though, Stubbs, you'll be disappointed I do not have him in my top 5. However, probably right outside it, because that's another, that Minnesota defense has not been what I expected them to be. Danielle Hunter not playing, obviously a big part of that. But we'll talk about running backs here in a little bit. We'll finish up here with my wide receiver 1. It's going to be DeAndre Hopkins going against that Dallas defense. We saw how bad they were in that game against Cleveland, where Odell Beckham Jr. goes for 3 touchdowns. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins this week could have an absolute field day with Kyler Murray. I am very excited to see this, what I expect to be. Well, we'll see. I don't want to take away from what Dak Prescott was doing, but I'm curious to see how Andy Dalton does in a full game with that offense now. I still think that Dallas might be able to put up some points. I think this could be a relatively high-scoring game, and I expect what I was getting at is I expect DeAndre Hopkins to have a huge day in what I expect to be somewhat of a shootout.
Yeah, I think I feel like I'm one of the few people who actually really likes Dak Prescott, both from a fantasy and like a real life perspective. I think he's a phenomenal quarterback. Um, but I think when you have an offense built like that, and granted the offensive line looks terrible, so I am kind of concerned for Andy Dalton in that facet. But when you have so many weapons around you like that, it's hard not to produce. So I think Andy Dalton doesn't have a ton of like big upside like Prescott has, but I think he also carries a very high floor, just in terms of like what to expect week to week scoring wise.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing about that Dallas offense. Because of that offensive line, we talked about, like Zeke Elliott should just get a bunch of touches. He's to be more involved in the offense. They're going to go run first. A couple problems with that is the offensive line isn't built to be run first anymore. They don't have the same pieces. It's not the same old Dallas offensive line, especially without Tyron Smith now too. And the other part of that is just that that's not Mike McCarthy's MO. Like we saw it back in Green Bay. They're not going to be a run first team. I still expect them to try to operate through the pass. You're going to see it dialed back a little bit. Like Andy Dalton's not going to be slinging the ball 50 times like we've seen Dak Prescott do. But I still think that offense is going to be pass first. And, until they prove me wrong, until Mike McCarthy offense proves me wrong, I still think that, those pass catchers and even Andy Dalton, who I might talk about in a little bit, I think that they provide value.
Yeah, Dalton didn't look terrible in the time that
Him and Michael Gallup on that last drive.
Dallas. Yeah, I mean he was throwing bread in the bread basket for sure.
Okay, well, speaking of quarterbacks,
dude, you always find a way to segue everything so perfectly. I think everywhere is super jealous. So yeah, my number 5 guy, considered one of the bigger busts this year, just in terms of fantasy production and value. Lamar Jackson going up against the Philadelphia Eagles. He's not putting up 40 points a game like people thought he would. I think he's been at least a little disappointing for people who did take him very high. He had just 2 carries last Sunday. I know 27-3 victory. Part of that was because he was injured with the knee. Part of that was also because he might have been feeling ill. He said he was, feeling a little bit sick throughout the week. So whenever it came game time, he didn't have to do very much. But he's going to hopefully be 100% healthy for a defense that just got shredded by Big Ben Roethlisberger. So, you have to look at what Big Ben did last week, and if they get healthy, Lamar Jackson can replicate the same facets.
Yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me. I mean, it's crazy to think that we're at the point where that seems kind of low for him, but that's about where he's been this year, at best. So, I mean, even putting him that high, you're kind of just banking on what we know the upside is. But yeah, as you mentioned, dealing with a little bit of a sickness as well as he missed practice with a knee thing. If he's 100%, there's no reason to believe that he shouldn't bounce back and get up into that top 5, if for nothing else, what he brings with his legs.
So quarterback 4, Aaron Rodgers versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Disappointing 0 points last week on bye week, so he'll look to bounce back this week.
Dud of the week.
Yep, and getting the top 5. He has thrown for no less than 240 yards. He has thrown for no less than 2 touchdowns per game. He's getting his shiny new toy in Devontae Adams back. Hopefully, knocking on his fake wood here. You got to love the numbers that Aaron Rodgers has put up this year. Like you already said, he's one of the top MVP candidates, and he's just been slinging that thing. And, I think Jordan Love, being in the backseat behind him, being drafted with a very high selection, kind of lit a fire underneath him. And he's out there to prove that he's still one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and so far he has. So he puts up points week to week. Tampa Bay's secondary doesn't scare me at all. I understand their defense as a whole is, pretty solid. It's not great. It's not terrible. But it's Aaron Rodgers, and whenever you convince me that Devontae Adams is playing again, then he's going to be in my top 5 every time.
Yeah, in a weird way, that Jordan Love pick has helped out the Packers already, even though he's not even active as the backup. But what it's done for Aaron Rodgers, it's just lit a new fire under him. It's a completely different Aaron Rodgers. He looks like the guy of the 2015 version. And, obviously that's great for the Packers and their fans. So yeah, no, you're not going to get an argument for me having him in the top 5.
Number 3 quarterback is actually playing right now, Josh Allen versus the Kansas City Chiefs. I love this matchup for Josh Allen. Along with what he provides on the ground, the Chiefs defense is giving up nearly 300 passing yards per game. They already have allowed 13 passing touchdowns on the year. Josh Allen has found a very, very nice connection with Stephon Diggs. That's proving week by week. And, the Bills aren't just a one-dimensional running team anymore. Josh Allen has fully taken the reins of that offense. He's a dual threat quarterback by, both means, textbook definition of it. And I think versus a very not great Kansas City Chiefs defense, who just got lit up, had a 40-burger held on them by Derek Carr. I almost said David Carr. Held on, throwback. Held on by Derek Carr. I think Josh Allen can replicate the same thing this week.
Yeah, I mean, we're getting deprived of Thursday Night Football this week just due to the schedule moving around, all the moving pieces and everything like that. So Monday at 5 p.m., next Monday at 5 p.m., we're getting Bills and Chiefs. Should be a good matchup. Should be a lot of points put up on the board. Yeah, you're not going to get an argument from me having Josh Allen top 5 for that matchup.
Yeah, it's going to be 2 p.m. my time, so I'm pretty excited for that.
Oh, true. Yeah, facts.
Speaking of 2, my number 2 quarterbacks will be Patrick Mahomes in that same matchup versus the Buffalo Bills on Monday Day Football. Led quarterbacks of 29.7 points last week in Week 5 versus the Buffalo defense's 31st in passing yards allowed per game. Patrick Mahomes, despite the loss last week, that offense has no signs of slowing down whatsoever. Granted, they have looked off at certain times this year. I will say that the Chargers did a very good job on him. The Raiders, for a good portion of the game, did do a decent job on him. But that offense, we talk about it every week. It just takes one play to get them going. Patrick Mahomes, for my money, is the most talented quarterback I've ever seen with my own 2 eyes. And he comes as my quarterback number 2 this week.
I think that we got to get a little bit more of CEH involvement, and that will really open up that offense and get them back to what they looked like against Baltimore and what they looked like in Week 1 against the Houston Texans as well, because those were the 2 best weeks for that offense. I think that they need just to get more production out of their running back, both running the ball into the passing game. But yeah, I mean, Patrick Mahomes, again, in a game where I expect a lot of points to be scored, every reason to have him, in the top 3. So.
And the number 1 quarterback this week is going to be Kyler Murray versus the Dallas Cowboys defense. Coming off a 26 fantasy point week where he threw for 380 yards and a touchdown. Also scored on the ground as well. This is a Cowboys defense that ranks dead last in passing defense versus quarterbacks. All signs are green. All lights are a go for Kyler Murray to have a monster week this week, both on the air and on the ground. And I think, at least for me, this is pretty obvious to have him as quarterback 1 this week.
Yeah, I mean, I have DeAndre Hopkins as wide receiver 1 for that same reason. Dallas is amongst the worst, if not the worst, on defense right now in football. So they've been brutal to watch. And with those 2, they should be able to absolutely light them up. So, yeah, I mean, if I was doing quarterback rankings, I would probably have Kyler Murray as my number 1 as well. So, we got a question here, actually. Lockett or Robbie Anderson? If Anderson, would you do Lockett and Woods for Anderson?
Lockett and Woods for Anderson. I don't know, because Woods is that pretty safe guy week to week, Mm-hmm. He's not going to score a bunch of touchdowns, but he's also going to get like his fair share of targets and catches and stuff. And then Tyler Lockett, he's had 2 very bad weeks in a row, but he still gives you that upside playing with Russell Wilson. He could easily pop off for another 3 touchdown game whenever. That's tough, especially whenever you consider Christian McCaffrey's probably going to be coming back as well.
That's the thing Robbie Anderson off to a great start. I'm surprised he hasn't been brought up more on here, honestly, because he's been the number 1 on that team over DJ Moore.
Yeah.
So it's odd that he hasn't been brought up on here, but that's the thing is, do you expect Teddy Bridgewater to continue to play the way he has? And when Christian McCaffrey comes back, how different does that offense look? What does it become? What was being centered around Christian McCaffrey? Granted, Mike Davis has filled in phenomenally in that role, but I guess I'm a little bit confused as well with the question. If you're asking me if I prefer Tyler Lockett or Robbie Anderson, obviously right now it's been Robbie Anderson, but I think if we're looking long term, I think Tyler Lockett's my answer, just because for the reason you mentioned, he's playing with what looks like right now the MVP of the league and Russell Wilson, or one of the top guys, along with Aaron Rodgers, and a guy playing right now, and Josh Allen has been phenomenal too. So I think he's the safer bet there. And then you said, if Anderson, would you do Lockett and Woods for Anderson? I mean, I definitely wouldn't trade like a trade or do you mean like playing both those guys and not playing Anderson? To me, Robert Woods is the one guy that I would immediately say I'm playing.
Yeah.
Out of those guys. And then it comes down to Lockett or Anderson, and I would pick Lockett. So I would rank them Woods, Lockett, Anderson.
Long term, yeah, I completely agree. But short term, Lockett's kind of like in the funk right now. So I would definitely side with Anderson for the time being. But just looking at the season as a whole, I would still think Lockett.
Lockett scored 3 touchdowns. He's just letting some other guys get some numbers, and then he's gonna start popping off again.
What a guy! What a great guy!
And then the same person said Mark Andrews greater than Hunter Henry greater than, or no, Mark Andrews greater than Hunter Henry. Yeah, Mark Andrews is top 3 tight ends. I understand that the production hasn't been exactly what people were hoping for to this point. He's had a couple of down weeks, similarly to how we talked about like the Kansas City offense as a whole. Baltimore's offense has been kind of sporadic as well, but we knew coming in that they were a run first team. There's going to be weeks where the pass catchers don't put up huge numbers, but still Mark Andrews, he's in that tier right below Kittle and Kelsey and we thought maybe he makes the jump this year into that same tier. So yeah, to me Mark Andrews is the clear cut answer there. Granted, I do like Hunter Henry quite a bit. Obviously his value goes up with Justin Herbert in there, looking the way that Justin Herbert has, especially, Keenan Allen leaving yesterday's game with a back injury. We'll see, if that affects him at all, lingers. But yeah, I think that's a pretty clear-cut answer. Tyler said, I can't trust Miller or Zacchaeus this week. I'm not trying to overreact to the way Fulgham has played the last 2 weeks, but should I play him against Baltimore this week for one of them? That is a tough matchup. I mean, that's granted, he had a nice game against Pittsburgh. He had a nice game the week before, but now you're asking him to win against one of either Peters or Marlon Humphrey. He's been the clear cut number 1 guy in the passing game. Baltimore's going to go back and watch tape on his game against the Steelers and say, okay, that's the guy we got to cancel out in the passing game. Yeah, I mean, I hate that matchup.
It's a no from me. Yeah, a lot of people are going to like this, especially being a Pittsburgh based podcast. The Steelers secondary is not the Ravens secondary. The Baltimore secondary is head and shoulders above everybody else's in the league, aside from maybe Green Bay. I could potentially give that argument. That performance you saw last Sunday is not going to happen again against Baltimore. I really think that was just a 1 week thing. And then you also have to consider that Alshon Jeffrey and Deshaun Jackson are potentially coming back in the mix as well.
So it would be Miller, Zacchaeus, Keelan Cole, Gerald Everett, Trey Burton, because Ruggs is on a bye.
I don't know. It's tough sledding.
I mean, at that point, I'm thinking either Keelan Cole because DJ Chark is hurt. But if it weren't Keelan Cole, I probably, as much as I do hate that matchup, I probably would throw the dart on Fulgham. As opposed to those other options. I wouldn't be using, a number 2 option at the tight end position for a team. I know Trey Burton has actually, he's ran the most routes at the tight end position for the Colts over the last 2 weeks. Over Mo Alley-Cox and Jack Doyle. I'm not sure exactly what Indianapolis's plan is there. But yeah, I think that I'd probably be monitoring Jacksonville's situation, and should DJ Chark not play, Keelan Cole would be the guy that I go with.
I think out of all of those guys, Cole probably gives you the most upside.
Yeah. But I mean, yeah, that's a tough situation. I think Ruggs is starting to come into his own. So once he comes back from that bye, hopefully he can be, a guy that stands out for you. And this isn't a tough decision for that position week in and week out. But yeah, for this week, 1 more week to get through it, I would hope that, well, not hope, but assuming DJ Chark isn't able to go with an ankle injury that he left that game with, I think Keelan Cole would be the guy that I would try to go with there. Okay, so going to my running backs to wrap this up here. My number 5, and this is assuming, again, I have Dalvin Cook in here, but he's not my number 5. Assuming he plays, and I'll just get this out of the way now, I have him as running back 3. However, I know he's dealing with a groin issue. Should he not play, I put in this guy's number 5, so technically he's my number 6 on this list. It's going to be Jonathan Taylor versus Cincinnati. Indianapolis, Not a great game against Cleveland. They're going to be looking to bounce back. I think they're going to look back and say, hey, we need to stop relying so heavily on Phillip Rivers, start running the ball a little bit more, and that's where Jonathan Taylor comes in. I think he's due for a big game. Granted, Cincinnati's defense not been as bad as I think a lot of people expected them to be, at least against the run. So they have been okay, but I think this is a spot for Jonathan Taylor. I expect an uptick in touches this week. Again, due to the fact that Indianapolis has to realize they can't rely on Phillip Rivers the way that they've tried to. So Jonathan Taylor, I like him a lot this week.
Yeah, at some point they're going to have to start feeding Taylor more. I mean, how much more Phillip Rivers throwing the ball every game do you need to know that, the best way to move that ball efficiently up and down the field is in the hands of a guy like Jonathan Taylor and in the hands of a guy like Naheem Hines. Taylor's had like a pretty solid rookie campaign given the amount of touches he had so far this season. Top 5, I think he would have been right outside for me. I'd have to look at the bye weeks and the matchups and stuff, but Taylor's impressed so far throughout his rookie campaign, no doubt.
Okay. Yeah. So again, if Dalvin Cook plays, he actually is outside of my top 5 at 6, but assuming Dalvin Cook won't play, I have him as 5. My next guy, we've talked about him quite a bit on here. He's starting to gain some steam. James Robinson of the Jacksonville Jaguars. They're going against Detroit this week. It's a prime matchup. I think he runs all over them. I mean, I don't know what else to say other than this guy, his numbers warrant this positioning. He's been that good for them. So I think he's an RB1 this week because of the matchup with Detroit.
Yeah, at least short term. I mean, you have to have him in top 5 week to week, kind of like I said earlier with Taylor, it's just based off of injuries, bye weeks, and all that good stuff. He's proven to be the guy. I still have questions about him doing it through the entire course of the season, but just week to week, I mean, man, like he is so explosive with the ball. He gets you points, in both facets of the ground and the aerial attack. So Robinson's always a pretty good start, just no matter what league you're in.
My RB3, he's been also brought up a couple times. In place of Christian McCaffrey, Mike Davis. I mean, this guy, what is going on? I mean, this has been unbelievable. And now he gets a revenge game against the Chicago Bears, who he was on last year. He was on their roster last year. So I don't know what's going on there, but the Panthers offense, it seems to be going through Mike Davis. I mean, he's catching 8+ balls out of the backfield a game. He's running effectively. So he's been a monster for them. They haven't missed a beat.
Yeah, he might have carved himself out a pretty decent sized role whenever Christian McCaffrey, aka Darius Sanders, does come back and regain that RB1 role. But no, Mike Davis, in the absence of CMC, has looked nothing short of phenomenal. He has produced not quite the CMC numbers, but he's produced phenomenally. The Panthers haven't lost a game since McCaffrey's been out, and Davis has been a huge proponent of that.
Right. So again, I have Dalvin Cook here. Should he play? Assuming he doesn't, we jump to the RB2 spot, which is going to be a guy playing right now, Derrick Henry, going against the Houston Texans. We saw firsthand what James Conner was able to do on the ground. Let's see Derrick Henry go against that same defense. This is a great matchup for him. The Titans being a run-first offense, we know that. I got nothing else to say on it.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of shelling you have to do whenever it comes to Derrick Henry versus a Houston Texans defense that just doesn't look where it was supposed to be this year. So, as long as Derrick Henry continues to, get 20, 25 touches a game, I like him versus any defense, really.
And my RB1, we already mentioned it. Ezekiel Elliott is probably going to touch the ball 30 times, whether it be in the passing game or running the football for Dallas now. Obviously, with that going down. Goes against the Arizona Cardinals here again. I expect a lot of points to be put up in this game. The Arizona Cardinals defense doesn't scare me. I don't know what's going on, but Isaiah Simmons is playing like 5 snaps a game. I like this matchup for him, and he's going to be touching the ball a whole heck of a lot anyway. So regardless of who he's playing, with the expected workload he's going to have, he's going to be in the top 5. But with this matchup, I put him as number 1.
Yeah, PFF actually ranked Isaiah Simmons as, I think, top 25 in terms of handing out Gatorade on the side. So he's doing really well for Cardinals. But nah, Zeke's an absolute monster. We already talked about Andy Dalton and the potential for more workload with Ezekiel Elliott. And I think that's going to come in both the rushing and passing game. So, I think for Ezekiel Elliott fantasy owners, I think this might be a little bit of a good sign / like kind of a save a face for Zeke with a guy like Andy Dalton now. And, the Cowboys will more than likely rely on, Elliott to, like you said, touch the ball 30, maybe 35 times a game, just depending on how game flow goes.
Right. Okay. So now it's time to wrap up with some waiver wires. Um, QB position for me. I have one guy that I put on here. Gardner Minshew's the safer pick. He's owning 51% of the leagues, averaging 300 yards a game. It hasn't always looked pretty. He's turned the ball over still quite a bit, but if he's thrown for over 300 yards, he's thrown a couple touchdowns in multiple weeks. I mean, he's still going to give you some fantasy value, especially as like a streaming option. However, I'm talking about Dallas a lot. Andy Dalton's owning just 3% of leagues, and I expect it to heavily go up when waivers kick in tomorrow for teams trying to replace the loss of Dak Prescott with a guy playing that exact same offense. Again, we know how Mike McCarthy operates. Unless he's going to completely flip a switch here and go run heavy, which we've never seen him do, even when Aaron Rodgers has gone down in Green Bay, that's still going to be a pass-first offense. And with the weapons Andy Dalton has, I think that he's in a spot to succeed. So I still like him, as a guy that could provide some fantasy value.
I did not expect Andy Dalton to come out of your mouth, out of all of the things, but here we are. We've talked about it already on the show. Dalton didn't look terrible at all. There's somewhat of a upside for Dalton, given the talent around him. I definitely thought you were going to go with my quarterback waiver wire pickup. Justin Herbert owned about 35% of leagues. He's on bye week this week, but this is a long-term play, at least for me. Man, can that kid throw a football? He looks everything as advised as a top 10 pick in the NFL. I had concerns, coming out with his Oregon tape. He has destroyed all doubt so far. Looks like the best rookie quarterback. And yeah, he's put up 2 straight 30-point games, and he'll likely continue that after they get off on the bye week.
What's his ownership in ESPN?
35%.
Yes. So he's 52 in Yahoo. So, I mean, Minshew was only 51, but I had a feeling that he would get brought up on here anyway. So we got 3 names for people this week.
Yeah, I mean, and both of us are Dak Prescott owners, so we ourselves are going to have to probably scour through the waiver wire. And Herbert's probably a guy I'm going to put a waiver in for this week anyway.
My wide receiver catching passes from Justin Herbert is going to be Mike Williams. He's owning just 40% of the leads. We saw Keenan Allen go down with a little bit of a back issue. I mean, he might not miss time. I believe they on a bye this week? Anyway, is LA on a bye this week?
The Chargers?
Yeah.
Sorry, Chargers or Raiders?
Chargers.
Yes, they are. Yeah, but both the Chargers and the Saints playing on Monday night are on a bye this week.
Right. So obviously you're not getting use for him right away. That gives Keenan Allen an extra week to get some rest anyways. But still, Keenan Allen, this isn't the first, he's pretty often injured. So Mike Williams, who is also injured himself. I mean, we're talking about the Chargers, so everybody's injured. But when he's healthy, he's been great as a deep threat. And I think Justin Herbert is going to get the best out of this guy. I mean, we saw the game he had yesterday, the traditional, Mike Williams catch down the field, the big play, what he brings to that offense, which you got to love. So I think the Justin Herbert emergence really is going to get the best out of Mike Williams, owning just 40% of leagues. This is a guy I'd be picking up and could play, when they come back pretty confidently, I feel like, as a flex play. I don't know that I trust him as my wide receiver 1 or 2, but if you put him in as a flex, I think you do a lot worse.
No, not bad at all. He looked really solid last night as well. So I really like the point you brought up with Keenan Allen being out. He's probably going to be the guy moving forward. My guy, who looks to be the guy moving forward and who also is going to be on the bye week this week, Henry Ruggs, coming out, had a nice game, over 100 yards last week, owned about 48% of ESPN leagues. It's about time they started using their first-round pick. And, man, he looks everything is advertised just in terms of speed and nobody being able to touch him. Like I said, owned about 48% of leagues. He looks like the guy after Bryan Edwards. He got a lot of hype. On the Oakland Raiders team, a lot of people thought he was going to be the receiver to watch out for, and it looks like Henry Ruggs' time is now.
Yeah, you're not going to get a disagreement from me. I loved Henry Ruggs coming out. I thought he was kind of exactly what the doctor ordered for that offense, and they need to use him more. I mean, to justify that pick, especially when you consider, the other receivers that were taken just behind him, what they're doing right now. So, yeah, Henry Ruggs is definitely not a bad pick. Also, this isn't necessarily fantasy related, but I just saw that we had a question here. What are you guys' thoughts about which team should be on top of the power rankings? Who is the best team in football right now? That's tough because, if you're still asking me to give a Super Bowl prediction, it's hard to pick against the Chiefs because I just feel like at any moment they're going to get right. And, when they're clicking, they're the best team in football. They get the most talented player. at the most important position. So that's tough, man. I mean, Green Bay has looked incredible and without their best receiver. I mean,
I'd probably have to go Green Bay. I mean, both offensively and defensively, they look phenomenal.
yeah, I mean, it's hard to argue against, and especially because the Chiefs now have that loss against the Raiders. Green Bay undefeated, and that's again without having Devontae Adams, and even in their last game without Alan Lazard, who was their number 2 option in the passing game. They just keep finding ways to get it done. And yeah, they look much improved on the defensive side of the football as well, because that was the question coming in. So yeah, I mean, if you're asking me to give a Super Bowl prediction right now, I'd probably go with the Chiefs and Packers. A rematch of Super Bowl I.
Yeah, I think I might have to agree. I'm trying to think of other teams that have looked as good on both sides of the ball as the Packers have, and I just can't really think. I mean, the Ravens still look very good as well, despite the one blemish on their resume. But yeah, I think at the end of the day, on a neutral field, I would still take Kansas City over every other team in the NFL. But there's a lot of football that has to be played to determine whether or not that's going to hold true.
Yeah, and I think other teams like Seattle deserves to be talked about. Pittsburgh definitely deserves to be talked about. But again, when it comes down to it, picking with your mind, not your heart, you go best against the best. Assuming everybody's playing their best football, you got to take the Chiefs. Okay, so my running back here, and I already talked about the injury a little bit to Dalvin Cook. So Alexander Mattison is going to be my running back here. Owning just 41% of leagues. Obviously, Dalvin Cook has a groin injury that could linger for a while. Even if Dalvin Cook plays, how effective is he going to be with a groin injury? He tried to come back in that game. He played one series, went back out. In relief of him, Alexander Mattison ran for 112 yards on 20 carries. So, should Dalvin Cook be out? Again, I already kind of alluded to they'll probably throw the ball a little bit more, and that's why I have Adam Thielen as my number 2 receiver. But still, we know how Mike Zimmer offenses work. They're going to run the ball still, and Madison's a guy that could be a prime beneficiary should that happen. Mike Boone, he outsnapped Mike Boone 28-7 or something like that after Dalvin Cook was out. So Alexander Mattison is the clear-cut back to own, and in my opinion is probably the best handcuff right now in football.
Yeah, I mean, he every time the Vikings need him to step up and fill in shoes with Dalvin Cook, he does so, and he does so very emphatically. So I think he's probably playing himself into a decent sized contract, in his future, whether it's in Minnesota or not. Then that's just how good he's been. So very nice waiver ad. Even if Dalvin Cook should play, I mean, there's always that opportunity. Madison can have him take that. He'll take one to the house. My guy, I've actually talked about him last week. His roster numbers still didn't go up. Roster about 46.5%. ESPN links going to be Chase Edmonds, running back for the Cardinals. Last week, I talked about how he's slowly but surely taking over the role of the lead back for the Arizona Cardinals. Kenyon Drake hasn't done anything with that lead role. Chase Edmonds scored 20 points last week, and he's kind of establishing himself as that guy in the Cardinals backfield.
Do you have the game on?
No, my stream.
Dude, Derrick Henry just threw Josh Norman.
Really?
Literally with one hand stiff-armed him and threw him.
I'll see it on Twitter tonight.
And it didn't even count because there was a penalty. Oh, offsetting penalties. Oh my goodness. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it was Josh Norman. I mean, he shouldn't have even tried to tackle him. He should have done nowhere near him.
He should have took Earl Thomas out.
And my tight end, and I'm so mad that I'm bringing this name up on here. It's going to be Jimmy Graham. He's owning 40% of the leads right now. Granted, he has been very touchdown dependent, but he's getting those red zone targets on a consistent basis. And, his only competition in the red zone has been Allen Robinson. And, as long as Nick Foles is playing quarterback, I think that offers a little bit more upside to the offense than what Mitch Trubisky was giving them. Jimmy Graham, I'm not going to say he looks like the Jimmy Graham of old, but he definitely looks like a much better version than the one we saw in Green Bay. So.
Yeah, well, speaking of guys we already talked about, and speaking of guys that, are in Green Bay, my tight end waiver wire pickup of the week is going to be Robert Tonyan, owning 48% of ESPN leagues. I'll just kind of regurgitate what I said prior. Came off a 33-point game, off of a fresh bye week, scored 2 double-digit point games prior to that. I understand the Devontae Adams hype train is coming in. He'll probably see less of a target share, But if you're streaming tight ends and looking for somebody with upside, look no further than Robert Tonyan.
Yeah, I think he's owned in a little bit more Yahoo, so I couldn't use him here. But I mean, owning just 48% of what are the ESPN users doing? Especially at the tight end position where you're getting like nothing for most guys. Like,
yeah.
Real quick, we did have a question.
Hayden Hurst every week.
Yeah, I got Hayden Hurst and Hawkinson, and then I have on that same team, I have Dallas Goedert on IR. So we'll see how that situation plays out for itself. But we did just get a question roll in here before we wrap up. Should I drop Debo or John Brown for Jamison Crowder? You should absolutely pick up Jamison Crowder. Between those two guys, I think just because of like where guys are in their depth chart, I think there's a little bit more.
John Brown.
Huh?
Probably drop John Brown, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
With Diggs kind of emerging as the clear-cut number one guy, Cole Beasley.
Even like Gabriel Davis, who we've seen kind of come onto the scene. Yeah, you mentioned Cole Beasley. I mean, not to say like John Brown, really good year last year. He's kind of taken a back seat this year. And Deebo Samuel, granted, obviously, it hasn't really done much yet. You look at where the 49ers depth chart is, and it's a lot more open. Like Deebo Samuel still has the ability there to immediately be the number one.
Yeah.
Obviously behind Kittle, but when you look at the wide receiver depth chart, number one. So yeah, I would be dropping John Brown because Jamison Crowder should be owned in every single league with what he's doing right now, regardless of who's playing quarterback.
Yeah, so. I wouldn't have a problem dropping either. So I wouldn't sweat that decision too hard, but yeah, I would definitely drop Brown.
Okay. You got anything else?
No, I don't. No, best of luck to everybody in week 6. And
it's moving along quick, man.
Dude, it is, man. It's nuts.
So, best of luck to everybody this week in the matchups. Let us know how you did. Again, you can always tweet at us, ask us advice as the week progresses, even on game day. Whatever you guys want, whatever questions you have, just tweet at us individually. Donnie has his Twitter name right there if you're watching the YouTube. I normally have mine up. I forgot to change my name, but it's at Z23Smitty. Or, of course, you can tweet at us around the 412, and we'll get back to you. Send us your questions, advice, whatever you guys want, what you want to see on the show, whatever it might be. We're always open to suggestions. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Thanks for interacting with us. We absolutely love it. If you're listening back, please head over to the YouTube. And hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. If you are listening to as well, if that's the preferred method of listening to podcasts, make sure that you are subscribed to the podcast. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating if you listen on Apple Podcasts. You guys know the spiel by this point. Just do everything you can. The support's awesome. We love you guys. Thank you so much. Other than that, I just got to tell you guys about Keach Barbershop real quick. It's an old-fashioned barbershop. It's located at 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. It's open 11 to 7 Tuesday through Friday and 9 to 4 on Saturday. Every Tuesday, there's $5 off for military personnel, first responders, and nurses. Again, that's Keach Barbershop, 180 Brighton Avenue in Rochester, PA. So thanks, everybody, for listening to Around the 412. This has been a presentation of Crowworthy, where winners are serving winners coast to coast with sports, gambling, and more. Follow us on Twitter at Around the 412. Follow them at Crowworthy. Visit the Pittsburgh City page at crowworthy.com for podcasts like this one, blogs, gambling advice, betting advice, fantasy advice, everything that you could possibly want in a one-stop shop. Donnie, it's been a blast. To everybody listening or watching, thanks so much. We'll see you next week.